Now that our application component has been marked to provide the app repository, the Dagger code generation took over and figured out how to wire up the dependencies needed for that. We can see that our generated component has two fields, a provider of the GitHub API implementation and a provider of the app repository. In the initialize method, which gets called from the generated constructor, we can see how these providers are created. The app context that we provide isn't injected anywhere yet, so it remains unused. If we go to the mock GitHub API factory, we see that the getter calls new instance. Since this object has no constructor arguments, there are no other dependencies needed for this. Going back to our generated component, let's now look at the app repository factory. It takes in a provider of GitHub API, and the getter here calls new instance as well, but uses the mock GitHub API provider to pass the GitHub API instance. The new instance function uses that provided GitHub API dependency and creates a new app repository. What the Dagger CodeGen did is first see that it has to be able to create an app repository. It then saw that app repository takes in a GitHub API instance, so it validated that it could create one. Since we added the GitHub API module to our component in the past, it knew how to create a GitHub API implementation. It then wired those up, and the generated code looks not too dissimilar to something we'd write ourselves. The last interesting thing in our component is the double check provider. Since both of these dependencies are singletons, Dagger wraps the providers in a double check provider that makes sure that the getter on the wrapped provider is only called once. If we go into the double check class and look at the get function, we can see how this is accomplished. If get is called and the instance has not yet been set, we enter a synchronize block to double check the instance is still uninitialized. And if so, we create a new one. This ensures that the next time get is called, the same instance will be returned rather than getting a new one from the wrapped provider. This is how scoped dependencies are handled in Dagger 2. We'll see more examples of this, as well as examples of non-scoped dependencies in future videos. And we'll be sure to continue to check in on our generated components as we add more to our Dagger dependency graph.